coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. We've done it, folks. We finally made it to the end of season 2. So this week, we're going to take a look back at the season, talk about some of our favorite moments and quotes, and also some of our not so favorite things about the season on the whole.
But before we do that, if you could do all the YouTube-y things, like, share, subscribe, we would be eternally grateful, and the YouTube gods will be fed and satisfied. Without further ado, let's dig into season 2. I'm a poet, and you didn't even know it. All right, so let's start off with this. What do you think is the best episode of season 2?
The Bracebridge dinner. It's going to take it's going to take the cake for me. Everything about it just checks off all of the boxes of what I would have wanted to see in an episode. I love how this show is obviously, understandably, about Lorelai and Rory and about the men in their lives. But I love all of the moments that we get the secondary characters. And I even say that loosely because they are of so much importance in regard to me. I love when we see the cast of Stars Hollow coming together, and when we can get scenes with Kirk and Babette and Miss Patty and Gypsy and just all of the members of the town that we don't get to see enough, and even Mrs. Kim and Lane coming to this function, and we just get to see them communally coming together. It was just so heartwarming and so endearing, and I loved just how communal and how in a festive holiday spirit it was, obviously because it is that time of year. But aside from the warm fuzzies that it can give you, I think it also showcased a lot of really important character relations and interactions coming to the forefront, where we see how Lorelai and Suki are able to work through a really problematic situation at their jobs when the group that was supposed to come in for this dinner originally is not able to be there, and they have to figure out what are we going to do about it. And they just immediately switch gears and still make it happen. We see Paris and Rory really starting to even further solidify their friendship within this episode when Rory invites her to stay. We also start to see more of the Rory, Dean, and Jess triangle come into the picture, and we start to really get a glimpse into how problematic this already is and how problematic it's going to continue to be. Everything about it was just so well executed and so well done to me, and it's one of my favorite episodes to watch and go back to across all of the seasons, not even just season 2. But what's one of your favorites?
Well, Bracebridge also makes my list of excellent episodes from season 2. I don't know if it's my absolute favorite, but it's certainly up there because it's no plot, just vibes. It's the perfect Stars Hollow Christmas thing. And I think maybe that's one of the things that keeps it from being something I go back to all the time. It's just that it is so seasonal. And so, now that we're kind of getting into the warmer weather, I'm not exactly feeling the Stars Hollow Christmas vibes, but everything you said was spot on. It's a great showcase of the town all coming together and putting people in a room together that we don't get to see together all the time, especially Emily and Richard come in and are interacting with a lot of the townies as well. So they've got their own plot going on. That's a big step forward for them, but also you get to see them kind of with Stars Hollow, and there's just so much charm and so much warmth to the whole thing. And it's just, the sleigh rides, come on. So great. Love that. I love how they have all 3 Gilmore girls in a different sleigh, having a different conversation to sort of mark where they're all at in their lives and their relationships with other people. And yeah, exactly what you said about the Jess and Dean Rory love triangle. The sleigh ride between Jess and Rory particularly is so interesting because he's like, what do you and Dean talk about? And she's a little flummoxed. And I think it's the first time that she recognizes that maybe there's someone out there who's even more compatible with her than Dean. So very interesting, juicy episode, but also just so fun and heartwarming all around. But another one that
I will want to say one more thing about Bracebridge Dinner too that I didn't mention when I was talking about why I loved it before we move on. It also just really highlights to me, and it's not the only instance that we get of it during the season, but how Richard is so back and forth within his own headspace about, do I want to retire? Do I want to keep working? And as the season progresses, we see that he's obviously not ready to retire, and he wants to start his own firm and his own insurance company and take that on. But I also, as brutal as I think it is to see the lack of communication between him and Emily, I also found it really honest to see those moments where his wife is realizing that he's not ready to give up on his job and his work and his livelihood that he's had in that regard. So I love the interactions between him and Emily in that episode too, even if they weren't necessarily the most positive part of it.
Yeah. But when he's kind of, when his mood's on the upswing early in the episode, and they're like, you know, what's up with the pod, Grandpa? You know, you start to see this roguish side to Richard, and you see some of the with Emily and the sort of like the romance and the flirting that we haven't really seen from them this far. And you really see why they fell in love with each other and why they're still together all these years. So that's really nice.
Yeah.
But okay, one of my favorite episodes has to be A Tisk of a Tasket. It's just another one of those amazing Stars Hollow episodes where it's just a whole vibe. The bit of basket thing is hilarious. There's more tension with Dean and Jess, and you see sort of Dean leaning on Lorelai and having to contend with Rory having this friendship outside of him. You see the budding friendship between Rory and Jess, and it's a bit of a turning point for them in their friendship / relationship. So that's juicy. And then, of course, we have the whole Suki and Jackson contemplating living together turning into a proposal. And we both have talked in the past about how much we love that proposal. So just are you pregnant? I could never get over that. It will never not be funny. So that's another that made my list. I have a list of like 6 episodes from season 2 that are just ones I love to go back to and are just always a good time. And that's among them for sure. Any others you want to highlight?
Yeah, I love the road trip to Harvard. It's not going to take top billing. But the whole episode from start to finish is certainly not perfect for me either. But I really liked seeing all of the moments at the Cheshire Cat and just this eclectic group of people who are staying there who are just so far removed from Lorelai and Rory and their personas. These people are morning people who are going to wake up at 6 a.m. to watch the birds, which I personally can't even fathom either. That just sounds like the worst time ever. But they'll converse with you and you know, act like they've known you their whole lives. And I just like writing like that, where you're showcasing people that you're probably never going to see in the show ever again. They're just there for a one and done episode, but it's color and it's flavor to the show that just, I think, helps make the show what it is. And it was a part of the journey that they were on in getting to Harvard, and just it was a part of Lorelai's journey also with the healing and the recovery that she was going to have to immediately combat and that she was already dealing with. And then I love them getting to Harvard, and I love seeing how excited Rory is about being on a campus and being in front of the gates, and just seeing how she just lights up and how she sparkles, and just how enamored she is over the fact that in a matter of a year or so, this is going to be her life. And it's so exciting to see how passionate and jubilee she is about continuing education, and just knowing that this is what's coming for her and this is on the horizon for her. And so I love those moments as well.
I totally agree. Road Trip to Harvard is one of those interesting ones for me because I often find myself skipping the first 15 minutes of the episode and the Cheshire Cat stuff sometimes just to get to that Harvard goodness. Sometimes I'll watch the whole episode, but like the Harvard part is just everything. And I totally sympathize with how Rory feels there because we went to Harvard last year. And I think I had a very similar feeling, even though like my college days are well behind me. This year's actually my like 10-year anniversary of graduating from university. So it was more of just a vacation for me. But it was a miraculous place. And you're right, she does sparkle. The look on her face when she sees the library and Lorelai starts providing the factoids about the Harvard University library system. Totally relatable to me as somebody who loves libraries. So I too am all about that college campus. And so again, with the vibes in that episode, it doesn't quite get top billing for me either, but you're also right about the journey that Lorelai is going on with this one. So like, not only is it a big moment for Rory seeing it for the first time, but Lorelai is also now really starting to contend with the fact that Rory's going to be gone in like a year or two. And she, she's looking at that board at apartments for rent and just it's starting to sink in for her that soon enough Rory's going to be off in Boston, even though she doesn't end up there eventually. But yeah. And then of course we have the moment at the end where she's showing Emily the slides and it's like, that's a Harvard squirrel. Doesn't he look smart? Mm-hmm. And we can, in fact, attest that the Harvard squirrels are smart.
And very photogenic.
Very photogenic. Very sweet. We like the Harvard squirrels. Yeah, that's a good one. Another one I love is There's the Rub. Emily booking a couples massage for her and Lorelai will never not be the most hilarious thing ever. And also the most disturbing thing ever.
A little bit naive there.
Little bit. I just love how she keeps like popping in on Lorelai's treatments, and eventually Lorelai accepts it and starts to sort of like sink into a dynamic with her mom and tries to like get on board the bonding train, and then they steal robes together. Vicious Trollop is a good one. That we'll get back to that in a little bit when we talk about our favorite quotes, because I got one on that. But There's the Rub is always among the ones I love to rewatch. And of course, you've got the whole, once again, tension between Dean and Jess when Jess and Paris kind of show up on Rory's night alone. And Dean loses his cool and Paris saves the day. So that episode all around is just amazing. Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Perfect is a good word. Teach Me Tonight is another one, and we'll talk more about that. Actually, no, we already talked about that a little bit. So, go back and check out our Fight Club episode on that. That note, we dug down into the fight after the car crash, but that whole episode is so, especially when you know what happens, and then you're just always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So good.
Yep. We've talked about now the episodes that we love best. Let's talk about the episodes that didn't do it for you, or that are some of your least favorite.
Yeah. I personally think the weakest of the season was Secrets and Loans. Okay. The characters were kind of acting weird, I think. We know that Lorelai is proud and that she's independent and she doesn't want to accept help. But the fact that she wasn't willing to accept a loan from either Luke or Emily when like it was her beloved house that was about to fall down, I think she was just way too stubborn, and it caused way too much drama that didn't need to happen. I think there were other ways around it, and she was just being intractable when she shouldn't have been. So I didn't love Lorelai's reaction to Rory and the fact that she was fighting her over it. I didn't love the manipulation that had to go on behind the scenes for Lorelai to get the loan. You know, she tried multiple different lenders and they all turned her down because she has no collateral and not enough savings. And like, asking 50 times isn't going to get you what you want in the world of banking. You know, you can't just charm your way into a $15,000 loan. So I think she was being really naive and stubborn. And I didn't like seeing her act so immature when there was so much at stake. And the whole Rory Lane plotline also felt weird, with Lane joining the cheerleader squad and the tension that caused between them and how judgmental Rory was being about it. I just think overall the episode was kind of weak. It felt off in a lot of different ways. It didn't advance the story. The termites and the money question were never addressed again. It ultimately meant nothing. And so it feels like it didn't really add anything either for character or plot to the season.
Yeah, I will say the same, but for dead uncles and vegetables. That episode just felt like it was a total filler, a total fluff of an episode. It didn't make any sense to me. Why is it there? It's not progressing any storyline significantly. Luke is just dealing with making funeral arrangements for an uncle whom we've never seen, who we're obviously never going to meet at this point. Lorelai and Rory are just there to be like, we'll help run the diner, as if like, yeah, that's exactly who you should trust that responsibility to. Emily is just getting all up in Suki's grill about her wedding, which is comedic but unnecessary, and I feel like they almost beat that horse dead with like, we get it, Emily's just way too invasive into Suki's life, like, point taken. It just felt like an episode that was written because you needed to write an episode that week and not something that was substantial or progressing the plot in any way. And it makes me think about, like, X-Files had a similar format with how they approached their show, where a lot of times they would have just monster of the week episodes where it wasn't progressing the Scully and Mulder storyline. It was just having them fight a fun monster that week. But I was here for it because it was done well, and like, you knew that that was a part of the show and that sometimes you were going to get that without any exposition. But this show isn't like that. Everything is seemingly written for a purpose, and that just, this one just felt like it had no purpose. It was just there to be there.
I agree. That's one I often skip. It's only so. I do like that the other troubadour from season 1 comes back and opens a farmer's market across from Dosie's, and Taylor loses his ever-loving mind. Mm-hmm. And then he comes in at the end and he's like, "You put yourself through it, Taylor. You put yourself through it." And I'm like, finally, somebody can explain to Taylor that he's the one who creates a lot of problems. So I enjoy that aspect of it. But yeah, it otherwise isn't great. Another one I think we both seem to not like all that much is Lost and Found. It's another one where nothing really happens. It's just Rory looking for her bracelet for the better part of 40 minutes. And Jess cleans gutters.
Gotta make money somehow without stealing it.
Yeah. The best part of the episode is Lorelai going with Luke to see an apartment and just sort of explaining like, hey, maybe you should move on a little bit in your life and get a bigger place. And if you don't, you know, you might kind of like end up in your tiny little apartment alone forever. And it's just kind of a nice moment between them. And I also love how Luke comes in at the end and sort of yells at Lorelai. He's like, "I just spent $150,000 and it's all your fault." And he buys the building and uses it to drive Taylor nuts. And we all know that Taylor rents it out later for the soda shop. So I love that part. That's great. But the rest of it is just kind of like, eh. And just, again, pretty useless.
Yeah. I feel like even, we're talking about season 2, but even just amongst all of the seasons, 2, the entirety of season 2, I think, would be on the lower end of the spectrum for me in terms of just season rankings. I feel like we get a lot more from 3 and 4, but this one just, I feel like, had too many like filler and fluff episodes and not enough character progression and arcs. And we'll get to talking about that too, but there was just a lot that didn't do it for me. So there are a lot of episodes where I'm just like, you could have done better there, but you didn't.
There's a lot in season 2 that I like to just skip right over sometimes. It has some amazing episodes, like some of the best, but also like some of the worst. And 2 I haven't even mentioned, but won't talk about at length because it's basically just reiterating what I said about the others, about how they're fluffy and don't advance anything. Runaway Little Boy and Richard and Stars Hollow.
Mm-hmm.
I skip those routinely.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any, we've talked about favorite episodes, but just favorite moments across the board?
Yes. One of my favorites is in Like Mother, Like Daughter, when the Puffs have been caught at Chilton during the initiation. And Rory sort of like mutters under her breath, "This is unbelievable." And she finally stands up and confronts Charleston about, frankly, how short-sighted Chilton was about her socialization skills and how, if they couldn't see it at school, how it didn't exist, basically. And she makes an excellent point, and I'm really glad that she has a backbone in that moment and really just defends herself and says, "Look, I did what you asked me to, and it led me here. So this is really not my fault. And if I get suspended over this, like, it's supremely unfair." So that, and another moment from that episode that I love is once Paris catches wind that she's been sitting with the Puffs, and she sort of creeps up on her in the hallway, and Roy's like, "God, you're like a pop-up book from hell." I love that episode.
Yeah, that was a good one. Again, it kind of just, for me, it falls hand in hand with my favorite episode, but just seeing the entirety of the Bracebridge dinner and how that went down and how jolly of a time everyone was having. The sleigh rides were just beautiful and magical, and I just want to be on one of those. Just circling through the square on a loop. But another thing that stood out to me too was just Richard's constant, it's not really so much a moment, just as much as like it's his progression with just him realizing that he's unhappy in retirement and seeing him light up when he helps Rory and her classmates out with a project and realizing that he wants to get back into the workforce. I enjoy all of those moments of realization for him. And then obviously, you've said it already, just Jackson proposing to Suki in not an unorthodox way, but in, I think, a way that none of us as an audience were expecting. Suki definitely wasn't expecting it. It was so off the cuff in that moment. And I don't even think Jackson necessarily went into the bit of basket day thinking that he might propose. I think it was just the time felt right for him and it was a good enough moment. But just seeing that play out was just really endearing and really heartwarming too.
Yeah, I agree with both of those as well. And I would also like to shout out in Teach Me Tonight when Rory and Jess are driving and they're having that conversation. And Jess is like, "So what about you, Courtney? Like, what are your big career ambitions?" And she tells him about wanting to be like Christiane Amanpour. And he sort of pushes her on it. And I'm like, finally, somebody telling Rory that maybe this isn't well suited to her and it's not going to be an easy go of it. And, while I may not fully be on Team Jess in terms of his ultimate compatibility with Rory, their relationship and dynamic was always really interesting to watch, especially in the early episodes where there was still a lot of that tension before they started dating. I think he was good at sort of pushing her boundaries a little bit on some things that other people didn't really question her about. And that's one of those moments. Not to mention the song that's playing in the background on the car radio is just, I love that song. We played it I played it a bunch of times in your car when we were doing our road trip. The car song by Elastica. It's just, I love it. So had to shout that one out. But yeah. What about least favorite moments? Any?
Mm-hmm.
Standout awful moments.
Yeah, Rory. Let's just flash back to, are you the asshole? Yeah, you're an asshole a little bit sometimes. I hated seeing her miss Lorelai's graduation.
Yes.
There's no excuse for it. It was just, God, you're an asshole. Like, Jess and or like just boys, but Jess, like, they're always going to be there. Your mother is going to graduate once. So bite me. With the whole notion of, oh, I just want to go off to New York to visit him, knowing that your mother's graduation is the same day. And Lorelai was rightly upset and devastated when she's like, why weren't you there? So that is just one of my least favorite moments, because it was just, I mean, we all know that Rory is self-centered, and um it's all about her, and she's kind of in her own mind space sometimes, or she doesn't consider other people's feelings. But that really, to me, was just like, wow, what a horrible moment and a horrible choice for her to make, when your mother has done pretty much everything under the sun to support you and to give you the life that you had, and this is a really big moment for her, and you just actively choose to not be there and do something else. Like, nope.
Yeah, it was risky to get on that bus and expect that there wouldn't be like rush hour traffic coming back from New York. Duh. But that is a great episode. Kind of going back to some of our favorites. It's such a wonderful moment. Lorelai's been working towards this since before the show started, and so to see her finally cross the stage and, you know, move the tassel over, and to have her parents there for that was a beautiful moment that was ultimately kind of marred by Rory's selfishness and lack of foresight, and just her impulsivity in that moment. It didn't go well for them. But yeah. One of my least favorites, again, going back to one of my least favorite episodes, just the fighting between Rory and Lorelai about Rory mentioning to Emily that they have termite damage. And, you know, I know that Lorelai has issues with her parents, and there has been some financial manipulation bordering on abuse in their family dynamic. But Rory is old enough to have an opinion and to speak her mind, and she didn't ask for anything. She just brought it up, and Emily was willing to get out the checkbook and like do it, no strings attached. And it was Lorelai's attitude that created a bigger problem than there needed to be. And I don't know. It's a really difficult one sometimes, because you never know what the financial strings are in that family. But you know, they had been working on repairing their relationship for over a year now, and she still couldn't trust that her parents were capable of just doing something nice for her. And I think that it's something that takes a while to get over, but I feel like she was trying, and then all of a sudden she did this about face where she couldn't accept anything, and her pride just really got in the way, and I didn't love it. Mm-hmm. Once again, Lorelai's pig-headedness causes drama. Shocker. I know.
Yeah, we've never seen that happen before.
Never.
And I'm sure we'll never see it happen again as the seasons progress.
Of course not.
Yeah. I also really, it's not a singular moment, but again, just an overall thing. Like, I hate all of the jealous boyfriend moments and like the ego checks that come into play amongst the guys. Like, when Rory is rehearsing for the Romeo and Juliet scene, and Dean is just like insisting on being there because he wants to make sure that nothing is going to happen. And like, he, you know, plays it off as trying to be supportive of Rory, which I think he to an extent is, but I also think he doesn't trust Tristan, which I also necessarily can't fault him for, because Tristan is an untrustworthy individual, and doesn't respect boundaries and relationships. But just that whole scene of them like staring daggers at each other and like just goading each other as they're rehearsing, but then also all of the like jealousy and those dynamics that play out between Dean and Jess, like bidding on a basket and just trying to outbid each other. And just the whole concept of them not being respectful of Rory as a person and trying to like pull her in different directions and not being fully understanding of her emotional headspace and how that was going to be really just conflicting for her and stressful and a struggle when those guys are pulling her in different directions. I just on the whole don't love all of the jealousy and all of the ego and all of those things coming to the forefront that we see from the guys in this episode and how it affects Rory.
Yeah, those uncomfortable moments, especially the Dean and Tristan ones, are a big part of the reason I skip Runaway Little Boy basically every time, because it's just so uncomfortable to watch. It's so gross.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on to characters, perhaps. Who do you think had the best arc this season?
My initial response when we were thinking about this question in the lead up to this episode had me thinking no one, because I feel like this entire season was really light, if almost non-existent, on character progressions and putting forth good character arcs. I feel like, and this is something that we'll talk about too, I feel like this season really stagnated a lot of our characters and just left them kind of like hamsters on a wheel, just never really going anywhere and just running in circles all the time. But if I had to give it to somebody, I would give it to Paris, because I feel like she did a lot of work on herself this season with pursuing her, like still pursuing her own educational goals, but establishing a more healthy friendship and relationship with Rory. Maybe not being so contentious and spiteful in nature with the people that she is interacting with. And she just really came into her own with not being so closed off and in her own little bubble. And she started letting other people in, again, mainly Rory, but I think it was just seeing her start to socialize more and grow more in that way. It just did it for me. I think it really helped her at Harvard, or pardon me, at Yale too, when she gets into school. And the life coach is another thing.
Carrots.
Don't get me started on the life coach. That's a tangent.
Yeah.
But I think she really came into her own most this season, and I think she had the best progression in terms of the work that she did on herself and how that allowed her to be just a more productive individual and member of society going forward. She changed the most for me, and I saw the most healthy progression from her.
I would tend to agree. Like I was going to give this to Paris as well. You know, she starts out holding this crazy grudge against Rory about the non-existent PJ Harvey drama. And you know, by There's the Rub, she's stepping in and taking the heat off Rory in the moment where Dean is just verbally berating her about Jess's presence there. And, you know, she comes up with a great excuse on the fly that totally saves the day for Rory. And then Rory invites her to sleep over, and it's kind of a nice moment. And then by the end of the season, she's asking Rory to be her running mate for their school council. And they spend the summer in Washington, which further cements their friendship. And part of the reason I chose my Washington mug, because the end of the season she announced she's going to Washington, so I thought that was fun. But yeah, she has a great beginning to her real growth this season. I think it lays a lot of the foundation for the further growth that she does in season 3. You know, speaking of Washington, when they're there for the leadership thing, she goes on that date with Janie, and she gets her first like real serious boyfriend. She loses her virginity to him. She has to contend with not getting into Harvard and has to forge her own path and decide to go to Yale. And then, as you mentioned, it's sort of like it carries her through with her new attitude when it comes to starting fresh at Yale. So I think this is really where the beginning is for her. And I think it was a great decision to sort of write her into the show and to create this for her. And, you know, by season 2, she's in the credits now. Like, you know that she's here to stay. And so I think, you know, everything's coming up Paris in season 2 for the most part. But I would also like to give a quick shout out to Lane because, you know, she starts the season out a little bit reticent because her parents are sending her to Korea, but she ends up really enjoying that. And it's a really great experience for her. She joins the cheer squad, which is out of her comfort zone, and she gets them to cheer to madness. So there's that. She starts dating Henry. That doesn't go very well for her in the end, but, you know, it's kind of a step forward in her asserting her independence, at least. And she goes to the music store and sees the drums and figures out that being a drummer is the number one thing on her cosmic to-do list, which takes her through the next several seasons. So I think there's been a lot of growth for Lane this season too.
I would agree as an honorable mention because Lane, I mean, aside from the pregnancy thing, which makes no sense, and we'll get there, Lane always has a lot of personal growing up to do that stems from how much her mother really hindered her upbringing and the growth that she had too. So I think Lane definitely progresses a lot of the time and comes into her own every single season as we see her more and more. But I will agree that for season 2, it's going to go to Paris.
Yeah, on the whole, Paris. Okay, so that's like the best arc, but who was your favorite character this season? Was there anybody that you enjoyed watching the season in particular?
Jackson. Because again, we don't get a lot of him. You know, he's not one of our leading characters, but we start to see more of him as he gets closer to Suki. And I mean, I love Suki too. I kind of just want to give it to both of them, like the Suki and Jackson pairing. That would be my answer. Because we've talked about this too. They always had a really healthy dynamic with one another. Their relationship was, I think, if you were going to try and model one or look at one that has healthy standards and something that is like goals, so to say, theirs might be the one to look at most. But I really like getting to know Jackson better and seeing him become a part of Suki's life and how she incorporates him into her life, and just knowing that they're going to be a larger part of the show too going forward now because of this proposal. So yeah, I don't think that's something that maybe would be a common answer from a lot of people, but I would say Jackson. I really enjoyed just getting to know him better throughout season 2 from what we got.
It's a really interesting pick. I too quite enjoyed narcoleptic Nate this season. And okay, one of the highlights of the worst episode of the season, Secrets and Loans, is Jackson coming out of the closet in those photo PJs of him in his wrestling uniform. That saves the episode a little bit for me. Priceless. I think my favorite, surprisingly enough, was Rory, especially in the first part of the season. I think Lorelai starts off the season as a bit of a mess, and she really has to kind of like go through it in the first little while before really coming on an upswing for the most part at the end of the season with helping Richard set up the new business and with graduating and with her stuff with Chris and Suki's wedding. Obviously, her fight with Luke was not her best moment. Also, refer to Fight Club for that discussion. But Rory in the early episodes, you know, she's back with Dean. She is, well, I don't ultimately love that because I know what happens there and I don't really ship her and Dean, but she's happy and she's focused on Harvard and, you know, she has to kind of keep learning about what it's going to take to get herself there. And Jess's entrance really spices things up for her storyline and makes things very interesting. And now she's at the paper and just she's got a lot more going on, I think, this season. Last season, it was a little bit light on her, I guess. but she's really starting to grow up, and there's more happening for her. So I really liked watching her journey this season with Harvard, and kind of figuring out that there's more out there beyond like the one new guy that came to town last year from Chicago. So that was fun. I'm a little surprised you didn't say Jess was one of your favorite characters. Because he was pretty. You seem to like your Jess, so I'm a little surprised. But yeah, in season 2, he's a bit of a jerk. So. But a fun jerk to watch. I will admit. All right. What about your least favorite character this season?
That's a good one. I have quite a few that come to mind, so I'm actually trying to think like which one did I
Who was the worst? Yeah.
The worst of the worst. I think this will also surprise you. Jess?
It does surprise me, but it doesn't surprise me because he was pretty terrible to Luke and to Lorelai and to Dean. So,
yeah, I mean, his behavior, like, look, I made the argument that I go back and watch Battle of the Boyfriends. I made the argument that he, in my mind, is the right guy for Rory. I stand by that argument, despite not loving him in season 2. But nobody is perfect. Logan certainly was not. But you are correct that, like, and I will fault him for, he was certainly, above all else, not fair to Luke, someone who was going above and beyond to put a roof over your head, to take you in, to make sure and do his best to get you staying in school and on a career path and giving you a shot at life, so to say, and a second chance after your own mother just shipped you off because she did not want you around anymore. But he's also really insolent to Lorelai and to a lot of the people around him. He's even that way to Rory sometimes, which is, again, not great. But I stand by my argument. But that insolence and that immaturity and that just brashness, it's rude, it's unnecessary, and we see a lot of that from him in season 2. I think also just because of his life circumstances and where he's at with being shifted into a new home and a new town and a new living situation so recently. And that is obviously going to affect him, the age that he's at. And none of those are necessarily reasons to fully excuse that behavior, but I can see how that factors in with maybe sort of understanding why he's acting the way that he is. I will still say I didn't love him for that behavior, though, to answer your question.
Yeah, he's definitely at his worst in season 2. It's really his lowest point. Actually, Here Comes the Sun is his lowest point. But at least in season 2, like, yeah, you can have some sympathy for him coming from the background that he does. But you're right, a lot of his behavior is just absolutely unnecessary. Like, it's one thing to be sullen and insular from other people, and it's another to be outwardly hostile and a complete jerk face. So, yeah, he's a little rough.
Yeah.
For me, my least favorite was Richard.
Why?
Well, he starts the season off being a total jerk to Dean. Just being an arrogant, like, haughty, you're not good enough for my granddaughter kind of vibes. And it's just so elitist, and I hate it. So there's that. And then he's a jerk to Emily, too. Within a few episodes, once he figures out he's being phased out, he takes it all out on Emily, and she doesn't deserve it. And, she just tries to continue living her life and fulfilling her obligations to the groups and charities and boards that she's on. And he's just like, Emily, I don't have time to pick up my suit from the dry cleaners, and anything where they serve tea is a luncheon, right? Like, or no, it's a social function. Like he looks down on her social engagements and makes her feel bad and basically ruins Rory's debutante ball. That this was an important moment for Emily, and Richard missed that with Lorelai, and so it should have been more important for him to see Rory doing that, but he was so wrapped up in his own stuff that he kind of ruined the event for everyone, basically. And then he retires without telling Emily. He makes a major financial decision that's going to impact them both, hides it from her, accidentally tells her about it in the middle of a very pleasant dinner. And, ultimately she's like, it's okay, I get it. Like, I'm just glad that you're relieved and happy now. And then he almost also says no to being an advisor for Rory's group. Like, once again, like, he's got nothing but time, but is just so wrapped up in his own stuff and in his own world that he nearly screws over Rory when she really needs him. And so, and then he gets Lorelai to help him and tries to convince her to basically like stay on as his assistant, which is, way below her pay grade. And, she has a job and a career path that she loves, and you're not going to convince her to be your secretary, but you're just like taking advantage of her business skills in this moment. I didn't love that from him. So yeah, Richard did not have his best moments in season 2. I don't know if it's his worst, because season 5 is pretty bad too. Like season 4 and 5. When we find out about the Penelon lot stuff and the separation happens, he's pretty bad then. But this was not a good look for him.
I agree. I'm going to lead us into something maybe a little more fun to counteract that. Favorite quotes from this season?
Oh, there are so many good ones. I have like a whole list. I'm just going to start from the top. We're going to start with Sadie. When Lorelai's like, do you want tater tots also? And Roy says, that's a rhetorical question, right? That is so relatable. I am totally a tater tot girl. It's funny. I was never into tater tots growing up, and now I'm obsessed with them. So I'm just all about anything potato. So I'm surprised that I was never a tater tot person. But all right. You're next.
I would say one of my favorites is when they're talking about, can't even say it without laughing, when they're talking about Paris, and I don't know if this is verbatim, but it's basically just like, does she ever sleep? And it's like, no, I think she just periodically makes a whirring noise and then just shuts down.
I love that one. It's not on my list, but excellent pick.
All right, back to you.
Also in Sadie, I love it when Rory's talking to Max on the phone about a wedding ring or an engagement ring for Lorelai. And Lorelai starts barking, and Rory's like, no, that's just a wild jackal that hangs out here sometimes. And Max says, put Cujo on the phone, please.
Yep. That's a good one. I will also say, and this is relatable just from a love of food perspective, but the line where Rory asks, like, well, if the house is burning down, would you save me or the cake? And Lorelai's like, well, that's not fair. The cake doesn't have legs.
That's true. And on that note, if eating cake is wrong, I don't want to be right. What is right anyway? Who defines right?
Nope.
Such a good one.
Yep. That's going back to you.
I love it when they're waiting for the red light reveal, and Taylor is like trying to get Lorelai and Suki to like tone it down because they're about to do the ceremonial bit of it, and Lorelai's like, little tiny mouse voices. She's like, we'll talk real quiet. I love that line.
It's a good one. Also, I should have said this one first, and because like it's always been at the top of my list, but I'm going to say it now. I have no patience for jam hands.
Yes, jam hands. I too have no patience for jam hands. I get it. I don't like being sticky.
I don't even like kids. They just have jam on their hands all the time. Like, what is it?
I know. Even when there's no jam in the house, they always seem to have jam on their hands.
I have no patience for jam hands.
Oh man, I love it when Richard asks, "Who's going to help her get into Harvard?" and Lorelai's response is Reese Witherspoon.
Yeah, obviously.
What? Like it's hard?
Yes, actually, it is Reese Witherspoon. But good on you, Elle Woods. Oh boy. What else is a good one? I think like just the interaction between Suki and Kirk, and then just like her saying like, you know what, just Kirk, whatever you want to do. You're driving me crazy.
Yeah. Anything
like
Kirk.
Not so much as a line, but like I think that interaction between the two of them was humorous for me, even if the line itself is not.
Once again, it's two comic geniuses together. It's always going to be good, no matter what the rating is. They can just.
Oh my gosh! Can you imagine just a Melissa and Sean spinoff where they're both just comedically improvising off of one another?
I need it immediately. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, if you're watching, and I know you are, bring that to us.
Yeah, obviously she's here every single week.
Obviously, devoted fan.
Oh, I just thought of another, but it's your turn.
Again, with There's the Rub, when Lorelai's like, it's called Vicious Trollop. Oh, stop it. Now, why would you name a lipstick something like that? Because Dirty Horror was taken? You frightened me.
And I love how, like, the whole concept of Vicious Trollop is still existent and perpetuating to this day within the
I have
fandom.
a Vicious Trollop sticker on my laptop.
I've seen it. Yep.
Yes.
Another one that I just thought of, that again should have been at the forefront for me, is just during the sleigh rides, and they're talking about the horses' butts, and they're just like, "Oh, that's like a nice firm hiney," and they're just like, "Please don't talk about the horse's hiney."
That's a good one. I love in Dead Uncles and Vegetables when Lorelai's trying to serve Kirk, and he's like, you know, my coffee is quarter calf, huh? 3/4 decaf, 1/4 caffeinated. I 4/4 don't care. Fill it up. And then Luke comes back, and he's like, or Lorelai says that they're running out of coffee, and he's like, I'll make some more. And Lorelai says, I've got it. And Luke's like, do you know how? And she's like, do I? I am Kathy Coffee, mister, the bastard offspring of Mrs. Folger and Juan Valdez.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good one.
Yeah. Dead Uncles and Vegetables, coming from that one, too. Again, I don't think I'm remembering this verbatim, but when Taylor is just like, you know, I banged the meeting in an hour and a half or something, and Lorelai's just like, ooh, dirty.
I use that dirty Jeff all the time. It's so funny.
Mm-hmm.
From a Tuska to Tasket.
He's saying, yeah, go on.
I know. From a Tuska to Tasket, as long as everything is exactly the way I want it, I'm totally flexible.
That's always how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. What else? Oh, the crossword puzzles. You remember that? Like, the one where she's like, oh yeah, they make me feel stupid. And she's like, well, then maybe you just like shouldn't do them. And she's like, yeah, but if you don't do them, then you're also a coward.
Yeah.
I felt like you would appreciate that one because I know how much you love them.
Yeah.
Or no, well, jigsaw puzzles, but
yeah. I definitely went through a crossword puzzle phase though. So yeah, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I can sometimes feel cowardly when it comes to certain.
Okay, I'm gonna take one more before. Yeah, I'm gonna take one more before I bounce it back to you. Seriously, Jess, you didn't steal all the baseballs, did you? Well, I'll check when I get home.
We've had to use tennis balls. Very different results.
Yeah. And then you find out that like he actually did steal all of the baseballs.
Pierpont was also returned.
Yeah, it was baseballs, like garden gnomes. Jess has weird proclivities for theft.
Yeah, Jess is creative when it comes to his mischief. I will give him that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of other great quotes, but I feel like
Yeah.
that's it for me, unless you have more.
No, we could get lost in the weeds with them because the writing's really good, and I feel like we should start getting closer to the end of this because
Yeah.
we already have been going for about an hour now. Um, so I want to say, like, as perhaps a final question, is there anything about this season that you would change? And if so, what would it be?
Again, I feel like I mentioned this when we talked about season 1 and how they should have wrapped up the Max storyline. I really wish we had sort of bought back some of that time at the beginning of the season and introduced Jess sooner. You know, I think it would have been interesting if they had started the season out on the road trip to Harvard. Like if they had finished season 1 basically at the end of season 2, episode 3, like have it shoved back in time a little bit. I think that would have been maybe a more effective use of narrative time. And I also just, again, wish that there was less fluff this season. I think it was just a little too, like, it had a lot of great moments, but there were also a lot of things where it's just like, this does nothing for anyone. Can we move on from this? You're just kind of beating a dead horse with some of these things. And I don't really have anything more specific beyond that, but I think that's what keeps this from being a top tier season for me, because, you know, when you look at sort of the aggregate scores on like IMDb, this is actually one of the best rated seasons. I think it's because there are so many episodes that are so strong that it sort of like brings the average up a little bit, or at least doesn't allow it to be pulled down too far. But, and you know, that's not to say that any of these episodes are like outright bad, but they're just not as enjoyable. And, you know, there's a lot of subjective stuff that goes into that. It's a your mileage may vary kind of season, I think, because a lot of people reference this as their comfort season for sure. But for me, it's very middling, you know, like I much prefer seasons 3 and 4. And so season 2 is like right in the middle of the pack for me. Some of the later seasons are just stronger in my eyes. Like this, I think it's better than season 1. It has done a lot of growing and is very funny and poignant at some points, but at other times it's just like, it's just not enough to skyrocket it for me to the upper echelons of my enjoyment.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. Specifically, just way too much fluff. And I will add that for me, my biggest complaint is just that I feel like illustrating, you know, how I said it before, I just feel like a lot of our characters were like stuck too much on their own personal hamster wheels, where they were just going in circles, round and round and round, but never breaking the wheel.
All right, Daenerys.
I am glad that you picked up on it. Oh my gosh, that just made me so happy. I was like, I hope she gets that.
Of course I'm gonna get that.
But yeah, they never broke the wheel or got off the train that they were on, and they just spent the entire season, most of them, just making the same mistakes, never learning from them, and just not growing or progressing as characters. So I wish that there would have been that for the sake of just better character arcs this season. But I get that's also not going to happen every season in a show, especially one that went on this long. There was a lot more fleshing out for these characters to do, and luckily a lot of them were able to do it. But that would be my biggest grievance for season 2. Just not enough growth within our characters.
I would tend to agree. It's kind of one of those interesting periods in the characters' lives. Like Rory is only a junior in high school. And, you know, so Chilton is no longer new to her, but she's also not in her senior year yet, where she's really pushing for college yet. And so it's very like almost like a limbo season. And Lorelai has just come off a major relationship and is only just starting to dabble back into the dating pool. Her story and her growth doesn't progress as much as it does, especially in season 4 for both of them. They both go through a major transformation by then. And that's part of the reason I love season 4 so much, is there's just so much change and growth and progression for them. So this one just falls behind, and there's not enough like meat there for these characters at this time. And so I think, yeah, cut some of the fluff and add something more substantial and juicier for these characters to really dig into. I think the saving grace of the season was the tension with Rory and Jess and Dean. But other than that, it was just kind of flimsy overall.
Yeah.
But I have one more question for you as well.
Okay.
I think it's a perfect place to end off on. How do I feel about the finale? Was it a good note to end on, or would you have ended the season in a different way?
I mean, I want to compare it, like, my initial response is to compare it to season 1. And so therefore I would say, like, well, yes, it's better because it didn't do that. But that's not what you're posing here. I need to evaluate this season on its own merits. No. I think went into I loved season 3 and season 4 for what they gave us. I think they're two of the strongest ones that we get, especially season 4. Um and perhaps this is even me being greedy then, because you get, like, it's so hard when you get such spectacular middle seasons in terms of like 3, 4, 5, and then you look at the outliers that are on either end of that spectrum and you say, like, well, no, they weren't great for me because they didn't match up to that, which I feel is what I'm doing here, and that's also not necessarily right or fair. But I will still say, like, I think it wasn't what I would have wanted it to be. I would have liked for a little bit more juice, so to say, going into the end of it. Um, and I think it's important too when you're trying to bridge the gap, like within the end of one episode in a season and how you're going to kick off the next one, with making sure that there's really enough there that's going to captivate the viewer. And I feel like I could have been captivated more, and I just wasn't. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I could see the captivation thing. It's not exactly a cliffhanger season. That doesn't bother me all that much. I actually love that episode. You know, like the wedding is just so sweet, and I think the episode on the whole is strong, and it's very emotional. You know, Suki and Jackson get married. They take that next step into their lives. Rory finally kisses Jess, so that gets some movement, and I think that's probably like the juiciest bit we get is um, just her kind of cheating on Dean in that moment and kissing Jess and running away and wondering what's going to happen with that. And then of course we have Lorelai and Chris almost getting together and like just being so close, and then having the universe throw a lightning bolt in there with Sherry's pregnancy. So it's really interesting. They're almost both kind of back at square one by the end of the season, which I think goes to the last points we made about not enough progression. It's the hamster wheel. But I think the episode itself is quite strong and quite fun to watch. It has a good rewatchability factor for me. It's not my favorite of the season finales. That has to go to Raincoats and Recipes. Duh. And, you know, Those Are Strings Pinocchio is also epic. Partings and Bon Voyage are both amazing, especially Bon Voyage. Partings is like pretty good, but Bon Voyage just I thought was a great end to the series. So this also kind of is middle of the pack for me as it pertains to the season finales. But the episode itself is just so great that, you know, I think it was a pretty good place to leave off on the whole, I guess.
I would say, just to anyone who's listening to us, and if you were at the end of season 2, just, we said this at the end of season 1, but just like keep watching, because this show just does get better and better and better, especially as you hit those middle seasons. That's really the chef's kiss of what this show brings to the table. So I would wrap up season 2 saying, like, yes, again, a well done effort, not the best that this show gives us. So keep going as a viewer, because you will not be disappointed.
Mm-hmm. I can't wait to get into season 3. I love season 3.
Yeah. Season 3 and 4, I feel like we're just going to be gushing constantly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's going to wind us down and close us out for this one. Again, just So excited to start diving into season 3. Just such good stuff. But how are we going to kick it off? What's coming up next for us?
Next up, we actually have our Dean character breakdown. So we're going to be talking about good old Dino for like at least an hour and just ripping into him a little bit. Yeah, we might have to go longer than that because there's a lot to say about him. But yeah, so character deep dive on, you know, the psyche and behavior and plot and all those good things for one Dean Forrester.
Mm-hmm. We have thoughts. Trust us.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I know you do, especially.
Yes. I mean, I have talked about him at length already in our episodes about their early relationship in season 1, but there's still more. There's still so much more.
Yep. In the meantime, watch some of our old videos while you wait for that character study to drop. FanFest is coming. We're going to start reminding you about that more and more as it gets closer. We will be there. We hope that if you're watching this, that you will join us because we would love to meet more Gilmore Girls fans and people within the fandom. So we're so excited for that this coming fall. And as always, please just do all of those YouTube things for us. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, check us out on social media. All of those accounts are in the description below. And join us next week as we just roast Dean over an open flame.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
Yes. But we'll also drop us a comment about what your favorite and least favorite moments from season 2 are.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. That's why we're here to engage.
Indeed.
So, thanks for joining us and for the support as always. And until next week, have a good weekend and we'll see you next Friday for dinner.
Bye.
Bye.